Welcome to an Odyssey in Mixology. Today, I'm diving into the spirit lineup from Amass Distilleries, a brand that's not only highly awarded, but also brings a pretty unique approach to spirit making. In my next video, I'm creating some brand new cocktails designed to capture Amass's whole philosophy using these spirits. So if you haven't already, hit that like button and subscribe, but above all else, enjoy. There really are a lot of award-winning spirits out there, but the lineup from Amass really stands apart. Even though they produce only a gin, a vodka, and the occasional limited edition, there's actually a lot more to unpack here than you might expect. So some spirit producers, like Empirical, focus on pushing boundaries with wild flavors and experimental distillations, whilst others take the opposite approach. They aim to perfect a familiar and classic process. And Amass sits somewhere in the middle. Their standard releases are approachable and familiar, but their limited editions can go completely off the rails, usually in a good way. The cornerstone of the Amass lineup is their dry gin, which took home a gold medal at the 2020 Bartender Spirits Awards. It's a modern-style gin, dialing back the heavy juniper punch of a London Dry and swapping it for citrus, layered botanicals, and even a bit of mushroom and root. That very same year, their botanical vodka earned the same award. It's made from wheat, and like the gin, its recipe includes a mix of natural botanicals. Whereas the gin has some darker ingredients, the vodka combines flowers and lemon zest for a brighter depth. Both of these bottles usually run about $40 each, and they also each come in at 80 proof. Now, it's worth noting that a gold medal at the Bartender Spirits Awards does not mean best overall. It simply means the spirit scored high enough to earn gold status. Plenty of other bottles earned gold that year too, but it's still a strong indicator of quality. Their limited edition Mushroom Reserve 30 gin is a barrel-aged twist on their dry gin. That's then infused with shiitake mushrooms, bergamot, and cacao nibs. It hasn't won any awards, and honestly, that's pretty understandable. This is unlike any other spirit I've tasted before, but does that uniqueness justify the $60 price tag? We'll get to that a little bit later on. To reiterate, it's a surprisingly strong lineup, even though it's small. You get refined takes on the classic spirits, plus a wild experiment that does something completely new. And tying them all together is a shared philosophy largely shaped by Amass's founder and master distiller Morgan McLaughlin. Morgan grew up in Vancouver, constantly exploring its temperate rainforest, and she developed a love of plants early on. It wasn't just an appreciation, though. She wanted to understand them. In her late 20s, she moved to Los Angeles, and although she expected to pursue a career as an artist or a keyboardist, Southern California's incredible plant diversity turned out to be a new adventure. In her own words, she began collecting the plants she discovered, sometimes even making homemade liqueurs like one she crafted from walnuts she found in Griffith Park. Now, that hobby eventually grew into home distilling, first with hand-picked cantaloupe, and later a clementine orange vodka that started generating some real buzz. In 2012, she took that clementine vodka and co-founded downtown LA's Spirit Guild. The goal was to create a small craft distillery that could showcase California's unique fruits and ingredients. It gained a lot of local attention, but operating costs were high, and as is often the case with small craft distilleries, quality doesn't always guarantee survival, and the Spirit Guild eventually closed. Now, luckily, Morgan took away valuable lessons, and in 2016, she co-founded Amass with Mark Lynn. And thanks to the lessons learned from the Spirit Guild, Amass takes a different approach to distilling. They still maintain a presence in downtown LA, but now they collaborate with other distilleries to produce most of their spirits. And they do this all while keeping the same focus on natural botanicals and plants that the Spirit Guild was known for. Their parent company, Amass Brands Group, doesn't stop at spirits though. They also produce non-alcoholic and THC-infused beverages, seltzers, wines, and even a tequila and a mezcal, each under different names. As a result of their business model, Amass's core spirits have not only earned global acclaim, they're also widely available. Today, you can find the gin at just about every decent liquor store, and the vodka in nearly as many. The mushroom gin, as far as I know, is only available online, but there are likely a few other limited editions on the horizon. I mentioned earlier that the gin and the vodka might be a bit more standard, but one look at their ingredient list proves otherwise. The catch? All these ingredients are blended before distillation. They're not added afterwards in an infusion. And that means you're not tasting the full intensity of any single ingredient, just subtle hints of several. Now, this approach works really well for creating high quality, highly complex, and subtly unique spirits. The downside is that a lot of these complex nuances can get lost in more detailed and complex cocktails. In simple cocktails, you can tell the difference, and when drinking straight, it starts to tell more of the story. Just not entirely in the way you might expect from reading the label. With the vodka, it tastes less medicinal than I would expect from a wheat vodka. There is a floral aspect to it, but what I get most of all is citrus and black tea, more so than anything else. For the gin, it's more complex, but there's also more ingredients. I still notice that black tea first, but this one's backed up by grapefruit, rosemary, nutmeg, and a touch of licorice that combines really nicely with the juniper. It's not overly juniper forward, but it is layered well to create a really interesting gin. And this is usually the part of the video where I go through every single little detail, but realistically, this is just a gin and a vodka. They're nice ones, but they are just a gin and a vodka. And that just means it's easier to show you how they taste compared to other things on the market, rather than talking through the super detailed subjective taste profile. And here's how I break it down. This is a plain organic wheat vodka called Froggy Bee. It's my well vodka, but it's neutral, inoffensive, cheap, and I think punches a bit higher than its weight class as far as quality for the cost that you pay. Wheat vodka can taste a bit medicinal at times, and this is no exception, but it is a cleaner, less medicinal flavor than a lot of the other budget vodkas that are out there. Next up is a London dry gin, and think of this as gins like your Hendrick's and your Tanqueray. Now, Du Nord is a more herbal variation of this, so it leans a bit darker, but still keeps that London dry style juniper front and center. And finally, this is a high herbal modern gin that's been left unfiltered. Now, modern gins don't rely on the juniper as heavily as a London dry, and this one is vapor distilled to extract flavor from 22 herbs and botanicals, and then it's bottled unfiltered. It's packed with spice and warm herbal notes, so much so that a devoted Tanqueray drinker might not even recognize it as a gin. Now, I want you to imagine the flavor progression across all of these bottles, from completely neutral to unfiltered, spiced botanical overload. The Amass vodka sits right here, and the Amass gin sits right here. And this is actually a great way to visualize how the flavor evolves between all of these different spirits and where the Amass spirits place in stuff that we know. The Amass vodka, and yes, it is a wheat vodka like the Froggy Bee, but it's darker, more interesting, and more complex. I also wouldn't go as far as to say that it's smooth, but it is less sharp than your typical vodka. Now, imagine taking this vodka and adding juniper to it. You'd end up with something much more similar to a herbal London dry gin like this one, whereas if you add the juniper to the Froggy Bee, it's a little bit less impactful. It kind of clashes with the medicinal quality, and it's a bit more one-dimensional. Juniper obviously adds a distinctive, brighter twang, and so you could never confuse the Amass vodka with a gin, but it is starting to lean a bit further away from neutral vodka territory, and that's obvious when comparing both of these two bottles. Similarly, the Amass sits in between a London dry and a high herbal unfiltered modern gin. All three of these have herbal components, but Amass balances the classic juniper forwardness with the extra complexity from its very large ingredient list. Honestly, it can be very hard to impossible to pick out any of the individual ingredients from this bottle, but the flavor is still clean, well-balanced, and nuanced. On the other side, it's not as bold or in-your-face as this high herbal unfiltered modern gin, even if it does share some of the same qualities, just toned down quite a bit. The flavor progression across these 5 bottles is actually pretty linear. Personally, I think where the Amass spirits sit are both kind of sweet spots for spirits that are trying to be one step up from the norm, but they're not at any extreme. I actually really love the Dylan's Unfiltered Gin, but it's not for every cocktail or everyone's palate. And the Amass Gin not being out here means that Amass can show some uniqueness compared to this traditional London Dry, but without going so far as it turns people away. This is exactly where Amass should be, providing a balanced, approachable option at a reasonable cost for the gin, and with the same idea for the vodka. Now, that being said, Amass's Mushroom Reserve Gin is completely off the charts. It exists somewhere out here, but it deserves a conversation all on its own because this is the kind of bottle that I usually like to review for my videos. Now, the standard release of Amass Gin already includes reishi and lion's mane mushroom in its recipe, but if that's a 1 out of 10 on the intensity scale, the Mushroom Reserve Gin cranks that up to at least a 7. They start with their regular gin, then infuse it with shiitake mushrooms, cacao, bergamot, and mandarin oranges. After that, they age the mixture in American oak barrels for 9 months, and in case you didn't know, because I had to look it up myself, bergamot is actually a type of orange, and it's what gives Earl Grey tea its signature citrusy flavor. The aroma here is just absolutely overflowing with chocolate and orange. The mandarin and bergamot kind of lean towards a creamsicle vibe. It gives it more of an almost sickly sweet scent. If you've ever had a Terry's chocolate orange, this smells exactly like that, and unlike the core spirits, there's no subtlety here, and it's clearly an infused gin that the scent of which just fills the entire room as soon as you put it in a glass. Taste-wise, it's actually thinner than I was expecting. It's not the chocolate and orange overload that the aroma suggests, but those flavors are definitely still there, mixed in with spiced black tea. Don't get me wrong, it is flavorful, but the aroma is just overpowering, whereas the taste is much more manageable. It's sharp, almost spicy, and there's a dark, funky mushroom note that kind of complements the chocolate very well, but it is very much muted in comparison to that and the orange. Based on smell, I would have guessed this was going to be more of a dessert-style drink, but on the palate, it's not overly sweet. I think dark chocolate instead of milk chocolate and orange peel instead of orange juice. It is sweeter than the gin it's made from, but it's nowhere near as sweet as a Grand Marnier, which is, surprisingly, the most mainstream bottle its flavor is similar to. At the very least, it's much closer to a Grand Marnier than an Old Tom gin like Bar Hill's Tomcat gin. And that leaves me a bit conflicted because, on one hand, this has a place in my lineup of fun bottles, but I bought it to have a mushroom-forward gin, and that's not really what this is. My hope was that I could make very herbal, umami-forward cocktails using this as the base, but the abundance of orange and chocolate kind of pushes us towards the background of a drink unless you want those flavors in front. And that's part of the problem for me, because reducing the volume of this in a cocktail makes the mushrooms stand out even less. So this really doesn't fit the use that I was expecting or necessarily wanting from that bottle. That being said, this can make a great chocolate orange hinted Negroni or old fashioned, and it definitely took a lot of skill to blend these, let's say, conflicting ingredients together in a way that really is enjoyable to sip and not overpowering. I do like this. It's an interesting gin that goes further than every other Old Tom gin that I've tried. It's just not the gin to make umami cocktails from. As far as limited edition spirits go, Amass's Mushroom Reserve 30 really hits hard. It's unique, not designed to win over everyone, but showcases flavors and aromas in pretty bold and definitely unexpected ways. In short, it's a fun bottle, and I like that, but I don't think I love this gin. I was hoping for less orange and more mushroom, but it's still another cool ingredient for making cocktails, and straight up, it's been a fan favorite at my bar. Mushrooms and spirits might seem odd, but when done properly, they're really interesting, and Amass could have gone a bit further in highlighting them here. It's not overpriced, but it's also not a deal, and because of that, I'm not going to restock it once it's gone. Now, that being said, I really hope Amass keeps releasing new, out-there limited editions. I'll probably wait to buy those instead, because Amass has shown they know how to create high-quality and truly unique spirits. Overall, I think Amass has positioned itself in a very sustainable spot in the industry. That's thanks to a combination of Morgan's philosophy of working with natural ingredients and also the smart business decisions that she and her team has made along the way. Amass gets to showcase nature in well-crafted spirits whilst keeping costs manageable and the bottles available to most people. Their core lineup of spirits can easily replace generic vodka or gin in most cocktails, and the drink will always improve, even if only a little bit. It might not always be obvious, but the less these spirits are overpowered by other ingredients, then the more their quality shines through. At the same time, they offer special editions that draw in people like me that are looking for something a little bit more out of the norm. And I hate to use the term premium spirits. It often feels like just lazy marketing, and the amount of times that you go through a liquor store and see bottles that say premium spirit in them is just kind of frustrating. But in this case, the vodka and the gin truly are step-ups over the typical normal bottles in that same price range. In my next video, I'll be creating brand new cocktails that use each of these spirits whilst also channeling Amass's philosophy of blending natural ingredients together in fairly complex ways. If you haven't already, then please hit that like button and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Cheers!